The other big news today is that Foreign Minister Penny Wong is heading to China. And let's be really clear about this. I don't have a problem with that. And I'll go so far as to say that I think the way the Albanese government has conducted its foreign and defense policy has been really something of a pleasant surprise thus far. But I also have to wonder, as the Chinese move to thaw out a relationship that they chose to put in the freezer, when Scott Morrison had the bad taste to ask pesky little questions like, oh, I don't know, what were you getting up to in that Wuhan lab that led to a worldwide pandemic and killed several million people? And the question is simply this: what must the Chinese think of Australia? And how much respect do they have for us in Beijing going into these talks? Can you imagine their diplomats sitting in their compounds in Sydney and Canberra, reading the papers and sending cables back home? They must think we're a country that has lost its will to live. Now, I'm not just talking about our energy policy, which seems to be deliberately calibrated to weaken our ability to manufacture and extract resources and generally be a rich and secure nation. No, I'm talking about what's going on culturally. To put it bluntly, can you think of another nation whose elites are more devoted to running down their own country as Australia? What other way is there to see it? When the date of the founding of modern Australia, the landing of the first fleet at Port Jackson, is treated like a black mark in the history books. Or when major corporations, many of them owned by foreigners, join the pile-on, making it an optional public holiday for their staff. Well, you can see what's going to happen at these workplaces, can't you? I mean, once it becomes clear that the bosses upstairs aren't too keen on Australia Day and think it's woker for you to work on the 26th of January, well, who's going to say, no, I think I'll go have a barbecue or hit the beach to celebrate our freedoms instead? Could be a bit of a career-limiting maneuver. As with many local councils, which have now been given the option of not holding their citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day itself by the Albanese government, which had previously pledged to support Australia Day before the election, but which is now opening the door to greedy activists to again run down this particular symbol of the nation. Here's what Shadow Immigration Minister Dan Tehan had to say about this yesterday.
Basically, the government has said to councils, you now get a leave pass on whether you hold citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day, and that diminishes Australia Day. And the sad reality is this is Anthony Albanese crab walking away from his commitment to keep Australia Day on the 26th of January.
Now, this comes after the whole debacle whereby the Greens strong-armed Labour into including as yet uncosted programs to push us all to stop using gas to cook our food and heat our water and everything else. And it really does suggest that despite Mr. Albanese's pretense before the election that he would never, ever, ever join in coalition with the Greens, well, that is exactly what is happening. But it is all part of a bigger trend, which has been building steam for decades now on the left, which sees the entire period of post-settlement, pre-Whitlam Australia as something to be ashamed of, and Australia's Anglo-Saxon heritage to be hidden away in a closet, never to be spoken about, sometimes quite literally. Last week, it was reported that portraits of Australia's top diplomats were being taken down from the walls of Australia's embassy in London. Allegedly, they said for digitization purposes. Well, sure. Not that anyone really believed that. According to the Herald Sun, which broke the story, sources in London claimed the images were stripped off the walls because they were of white men who were symbols of the patriarchy, with the embassy wanting to appear more, you guessed it, inclusive. Well, fancy that. And then, of course, there is the coming voice referendum, which is fast seeing all the great and the good line up behind it, and which is supposedly about, again, being inclusive and helping disadvantaged Aboriginal Australians. But it is really an implied indictment of Australia as a place so structurally racist that only a constitutional amendment can undo the damage. And I say nonsense to that. Yet, it is powerful nonsense. Greg Sheridan wrote a brilliant piece in the Australian today about the running down of the Australia Day tradition today, in which he said, quote, if we decide January 26th is irredeemably morally decrepit, then we condemn our whole modern nation. This is exactly where modern identity politics goes. And this brings me back to China, which, of course, must be looking on at all this and wondering just how much to respect to accord our big little nation of 26 million people. The Chinese Communist Party may be responsible for all sorts of unspeakable evils, but even Xi Jinping has learned the lessons of the Cultural Revolution and rehabilitated Confucius. We, though, seem content to let the left drag us back to some year zero utopia, leaving us all the weaker for it. And don't think they're not noticing in Beijing.